All right, so today we're going deep on something that might surprise you, endocrine disrupting chemicals. But this time, we're not talking about the usual suspects like plastics or cosmetics.
Right, we're diving into the world of oil and gas operations. Might not be the first thing that comes to mind, but it's a significant source of these EDCs.
Yeah, oil and gas, not exactly known for being, eco-friendly, but I have to admit, I was blown away by the sheer number of chemicals involved.
Close to 1,000 different chemicals used in these processes, and many are either known EDCs or we strongly suspect they are.
1,000. That's a lot to wrap your head around. And when you think about the scale of these operations,
Yeah.
it's kind of mind-boggling.
And the thing about EDCs is they can mess with your hormones even in tiny amounts. We're talking trace levels having a big impact.
Okay, so let's break this down. What exactly are we looking at here? How are these chemicals getting out there, and what kind of risks are we talking about for people and wildlife?
Well, one of the big things we got to understand is fracking, hydraulic fracturing. It's revolutionized the industry, opened up a ton of oil and gas reserves that we couldn't get to before.
Right, fracking. I mean, it's been in the news a lot, but honestly, I don't think most people realize what it actually involves.
It's a pretty intense process. Basically, they pump millions of gallons of water along with tens of thousands of gallons of chemicals deep underground to fracture the shale rock and release the oil and gas.
Millions of gallons of water. Wow. And what about those chemicals? What are we talking about here?
Oh, it's a whole mix. You've got biocides to kill bacteria, friction reducers to help things flow smoothly, even chemicals called breakers that dissolve the gelling agents used in the process.
Sounds like a pretty intense chemistry experiment happening down there.
Yeah.
And then all that water doesn't just disappear, right?
Nope. Millions of gallons of wastewater come back up, and it's not just dirty water. It's got the fracking fluids themselves in it, plus naturally occurring contaminants from the shale. We call it flowback, or produced water.
So what happens to all that wastewater?
Well, they dispose of it in different ways.
Hmm.
Sometimes they inject it back underground, store it in these open pits, or treat it at plants. Problem is, some of those plants aren't equipped to remove everything.
And that's where the contamination risk comes in, right?
Exactly. The article you sent mentions some pretty scary incident spills in Colorado, Pennsylvania, groundwater contamination in Wyoming. It makes you wonder how much is going unreported.
Yeah, because without mandatory reporting, it's hard to get a handle on the true scale of the problem.
Absolutely. And it's not just water we need to be worried about. Air contamination is a big concern too.
Oh, right, because those chemicals can evaporate, right? From spills from those open pits and even just during regular processing.
Exactly. And studies have found high levels of volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, near fracking sites. Sometimes those levels are even higher than what you'd find in a super polluted city.
So we're talking about potential exposure through both water and air. Not exactly comforting. But how do these EDCs actually, mess with our hormones? What's the mechanism there?
Well, think of it like this. Some EDCs mimic hormones, like estrogen, basically tricking the body, and that can disrupt the whole delicate balance of our endocrine system.
It's like they're imposters,
Yeah.
throwing a wrench into the whole system. And that can lead to a whole cascade of problems, right?
Yeah. The article talks about a study where they tested 12 common oil and gas chemicals. Turns out a lot of them acted as hormone blockers, specifically for estrogen and androgen receptors.
So these chemicals are basically blocking the signals that our hormones are trying to send. And that can have some pretty serious consequences even at low levels.
Exactly. And it's not just theory. Those water samples they took from spill sites in Colorado, they showed clear evidence of endocrine disrupting activity. These chemicals are out there in the environment.
So we've got lab evidence and real-world confirmation. It's a pretty clear picture, and it's a bit scary. What kind of health impacts are we looking at here? The article mentions a whole range of issues, especially when it comes to reproductive health.
Yeah, it's pretty concerning. Studies are linking EDC exposure to reduced fertility in both men and women, problems with sperm quality, even things like miscarriages and birth defects.
It's tough to hear about those potential impacts, especially for families living near these operations.
Yeah.
And it's not just reproductive health, right? There's a potential link to cancer as well.
Yeah, there's a study that found a higher cancer risk for people living close to wells in Colorado, and another one showing increased breast cancer rates in a Texas town with a lot of drilling activity. Pretty alarming stuff.
It's all very unsettling, but it also seems like there's still a lot of unknowns. The article mentions that a lot of the research relies on proximity to drilling sites rather than actually measuring exposure to the chemicals.
That's right. It makes it tricky to definitively say this chemical causes this specific health problem. It's like trying to understand the effects of a fire just by looking at the smoke. You know something's happening, but you need more information to get the whole picture.
Exactly. So more research is definitely needed. And the article specifically mentions biomonitoring studies. What are those and why are they so important?
Biomonitoring studies are a way to actually measure the levels of these chemicals in people and animals. You can take samples of blood, urine, even hair, and see if these chemicals are building up in the body and potentially causing harm.
So instead of just looking at the smoke, we're actually measuring the heat of the fire, so to speak. That seems like a much more direct way to understand the impact.
Exactly. And it's not just about understanding the problem, it's about finding solutions. The article has some recommendations for action that are worth discussing.
Absolutely. But I think we've covered a lot of ground already. We'll dive into those potential solutions and what we can do about all this after a quick break. Okay, so we've just uncovered a lot of unsettling information about endocrine-disrupting chemicals in oil and gas operations. Where do we go from here? What can we actually do about all this?
Well, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by this stuff, but even small actions can make a difference. The more people understand the potential risks, the more likely we are to see change.
So how do we spread the word? Where do we even begin?
It starts with conversations. Talk to your friends, family, neighbors. Share what you've learned, especially if there's any oil and gas activity happening in your area.
Right, make it local. Social media is a good tool for this too, right? Sharing articles, connecting with experts, getting those conversations going.
Definitely. And don't underestimate the power of your vote. Research where political candidates stand on environmental regulations. Support the ones who prioritize health and environmental protection. We need people in office who will push for stricter rules on chemical use in these operations.
That's a good point. It's easy to forget about the big picture sometimes. And speaking of taking action, what about advocating for stronger local ordinances, regulations specific to oil and gas development?
Absolutely. Go to town hall meetings, write to your local representatives, speak up about the potential impacts on your community.
Make your voice heard. And what about supporting community groups? I know there are a lot of organizations already working to protect water resources and public health.
They're doing vital work. A lot of grassroots organizations are monitoring oil and gas activities, doing their own research, pushing for change. Supporting them can be as simple as donating, volunteering your time, or just spreading the word about what they do.
Right, because they're often the ones holding the industry accountable. And speaking of research, we talked about the need for more studies, especially those biomonitoring studies. Is there any way for regular people to get involved with that?
Actually, yes. A lot of organizations have citizen science initiatives. People can help with data collection, monitoring, even participate in actual research projects. It's a great way to contribute to the scientific community.
Wow, I didn't realize that. That's pretty cool. And even if someone can't volunteer their time, they could always support academic institutions or research groups that are already studying these impacts, right?
Absolutely. Even a small donation can help fund crucial research. The more we understand about EDC exposure and its long-term effects, the better equipped we are to advocate for change.
Knowledge is power, as they say. But with so much information out there, it can be hard to know where to start. Any advice on staying informed without getting overwhelmed?
Well, the article we've been discussing actually lists a bunch of good resources, websites and databases that track chemical use in oil and gas operations. You can even see what specific chemicals are being used in your area. You might be surprised at what you find.
I had a great tip. I know I'm curious to do some digging myself. What about conferences and webinars? Are those worth checking out?
Yeah, those can be really helpful. You can learn directly from experts, connect with other people who are concerned about this issue, and stay up to date on the latest developments.
So it's about being proactive, seeking out information, connecting with others, really engaging with this issue. But it can't all be doom and gloom, right? There's got to be some hope, some potential for finding solutions to this problem.
Oh, absolutely. Along with policy changes, there's a ton of exciting research happening, things like green chemistry and new wastewater treatment technologies.
Green chemistry. That sounds promising. Could you explain that a bit more?
Basically, green chemistry is about designing and using chemicals that are inherently safer for human health and the environment. Shifting from clean it up later to prevent it in the first place, what if oil and gas operations could use chemicals that don't pose a threat to our hormones or ecosystems?
Okay, now that's a future I can get behind. That just seems like common sense. And what about advancements in wastewater treatment? Anything on the horizon that could help with that contamination we talked about?
There's a lot of cool research happening there. Remember we talked about how some treatment methods aren't so great at removing EDCs and other complex contaminants? Well, they're developing some really promising technologies, things like super advanced filtration systems, special oxidation processes, even bioremediation.
Bioremediation. Now that one sounds interesting.
It's actually using microorganisms, tiny bacteria and fungi, to break down those contaminants into harmless substances. It's like using nature's own cleanup crew.
Wow, that's amazing. But even with better treatment, wouldn't it be best to just minimize the amount of wastewater created in the first place?
You're telling me. And that's where closed-loop systems come in. Remember I mentioned that wastewater could be treated and reused on-site?
Yeah, that sounds like a great way to reduce the volume of wastewater and the risk of contamination all at the same time.
Exactly. In a closed-loop system, they treat the wastewater and then use it again for fracking. Less fresh water needed, and way less chance of those harmful substances getting out into the environment.
So it's like a self-contained system, minimizing waste and being super efficient. But even with all this technology, it seems like we're still kind of reacting to problems after they happen. What about being more proactive?
Great point. Real-time monitoring could be huge. Imagine sensors constantly checking the water and air for EDCs throughout the whole oil and gas operation.
Like an early warning system, so we can act fast and stop contamination before it spreads.
Exactly. And with the way sensor technology and data analytics are advancing, it's totally within reach. Real-time data, sophisticated algorithms, even predictive modeling to help us stay ahead of the game.
That would be amazing. But technology is only part of the solution, right?
Hmm.
We also need to tackle that lack of transparency around the chemicals being used.
You got it. More transparency is key. It builds trust, allows for independent research, and holds the industry accountable. Remember those trade secrets claims? That lack of transparency makes it almost impossible to really assess the risks.
It's like trying to put together a puzzle with half the pieces missing. We need to know exactly what chemicals are being used so independent researchers can do their thing and communities can understand the potential risks.
Exactly. And it's not just about releasing the data. It's about making it easy to understand. Clear labeling, user-friendly databases, plain language explanations so people can actually use this information to make informed decisions.
Empowering people, that's what it's all about. But information alone won't cut it. We need some teeth behind it. Strong regulations and enforcement to hold the industry accountable.
Couldn't agree more. We need policymakers who put people and the environment ahead of profits. Close those loopholes, get rid of those exemptions that give the oil and gas industry a free pass.
Level the playing field. And it's not just about making rules, it's about enforcing them. Make sure they're being followed and that there are consequences for violations. We need to send a clear message that protecting our health and the environment is not optional.
Absolutely. It's about accountability.
This is obviously a very complex issue, and there's no easy fix. It's going to take a multifaceted approach. Scientists, policymakers, industry leaders, and most importantly, engaged citizens all need to work together.
Collaboration is essential. We need to break down those barriers between different groups and create a culture of open communication. We've got to share information and recognize that we all have a responsibility to protect the planet and ensure a healthier future.
This deep dive has been a real journey. We started with a simple question about EDCs in oil and gas, and look where we ended up. But I think the most important takeaway is that we're not powerless. There are things we can do, both individually and collectively, to make a difference.
I totally agree. Understanding the problem is the first step. By staying informed, engaging in our communities, and demanding change, we can push for a future where oil and gas operations are done in a way that protects both our health and the health of our planet.
Welcome back. So we've talked about the problems with endocrine-disrupting chemicals in oil and gas and what we can do about it. Now let's dive into some potential solutions. You mentioned green chemistry and some really cool wastewater treatment technologies. Can we unpack those a bit more?
Absolutely. So green chemistry, it's about shifting our whole approach. Instead of using harsh chemicals that we have to clean up later, what if we could extract oil and gas using substances that are safe from the get-go?
Okay, I like the sound of that. But how does that actually work? Any real-world examples?
Definitely. There's a lot of research happening in this area. For example, scientists are developing bio-based solvents and drilling fluids made from things like plants and algae, so renewable sources instead of those harsh chemicals.
Huh. That's pretty amazing, like swapping out your chemical cleaners at home for plant-based ones, but on a massive scale.
Yeah.
But I imagine there's still going to be some wastewater, even with green chemistry, right?
You're right. Eliminating it completely might be tough.
Right.
But we can definitely reduce the amount and treat it way more effectively. And that's where these new treatment technologies come in.
Right, you were talking about things like advanced filtration and bioremediation. What makes those so different from what's being used now?
Think of traditional wastewater treatment like a basic filter. It catches the big stuff, but lets those tiny EDC molecules slip through. Advanced filtration is like a superfine mesh that can trap even the tiniest contaminants.
Gotcha. Like going from a basic coffee filter to a high-tech water purifier. And what about that bioremediation thing? How does that work?
Bioremediation uses microorganisms, basically good bacteria and fungi, that can actually break down those complex contaminants, including EDCs, into harmless stuff. It's like using nature's own cleanup crew.
Wow, that's incredible. So we're basically enlisting nature to help us clean up the mess. But even better than cleaning it up would be to just create less of it in the first place, right?
Exactly. And that's where closed-loop systems come in.
Right, you mentioned that before. Treating the wastewater and then reusing it on site.
Exactly. So they clean the water and use it again for fracking, less fresh water needed, and a much lower risk of contamination.
It's like a self-contained system, minimizing waste and maximizing efficiency. Pretty impressive. But even with all this amazing tech, we're still playing catch-up in a way, right? What if we could anticipate these problems before they even happen?
I love where you're going with this. That's where real-time monitoring comes in. Imagine a network of sensors all over these oil and gas operations, constantly checking the water and air for EDCs.
Like a 247 watchdog. We could catch those spikes in EDC levels before they become a major problem.
Exactly. And with how fast sensor technology and data analysis are evolving, that's becoming a reality. We could have real-time data, sophisticated algorithms, even predictive modeling to stay ahead of the curve.
It's like having a crystal ball, but based on science and data instead of magic. But technology alone isn't enough. We also need to address that lack of transparency around the chemicals being used, right?
100%. Transparency is crucial. It builds trust, allows for independent research, and makes the industry accountable. Remember those trade secrets claims? They make it so hard to assess the real risks.
Right, it's like trying to solve a mystery with only half the clues. We need to know what's being used so independent researchers can do their job and communities can understand the risks they face.
Transparency is key. And not just releasing data, but making it easy to understand. Clear labeling, user-friendly databases, plain language explanations so people can actually use this information to make informed decisions.
Empowering people, I like it. But information alone won't solve the problem. We need strong regulations and enforcement to hold the industry accountable.
Absolutely. Regulations that prioritize people and the planet over profits, closing those loopholes and exemptions, making sure everyone's held to the same high standards.
And not just making rules, but enforcing them, making sure they're followed and that there are consequences for violations. Protecting our health and the environment shouldn't be optional.
It's about accountability, plain and simple.
Well, it's clear this is a complex issue, and there's no silver bullet. It's going to take a multifaceted approach with everyone working together. Scientists, policymakers, industry leaders, and everyday citizens.
Collaboration is the key. We need to break down those silos and have open communication, sharing information and recognizing that protecting the planet is a shared responsibility. It's about working together to create a healthier future for everyone.
This deep dive has been an incredible journey. We started with a simple question about EDCs in oil and gas and uncovered a whole web of complex issues. But what gives me hope is that we're not powerless. We can all make a difference.
That's the spirit. Understanding the problem is the first step. By staying informed, engaging in our communities, and pushing for change, we can create a future where oil and gas operations don't come at the cost of our health or the health of our planet.
Well said. It's been a pleasure diving into this with you. We've covered a lot, but hopefully everyone listening feels empowered to learn more and take action. Every voice matters. Together, we can make a difference. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep pushing for a healthier and more sustainable world.